We will go today through what does it mean to have an addictions problem, and then like how do we consider someone to be suffering from such a problem, and then we will go through the biology, what happens in the brain actually for people to have such a problem, and then we'll go with a focus on Newcastle, the Northeast, the epidemiology of the problem, the spread of the problem, what about the statistics for the past few years, what's happening, and then like some links and some information around if you needed help, what exactly to be done. So I'll be starting by defining what substance abuse. There's a difference between abuse and dependence, or what we call as addictions. So substance abuse usually it refers to if you've used a psychoactive substance. Psychoactive substance in medicine means like the cannabis, the drugs, the cocaine, the amphetamines, things like street drugs that you hear about. And the use of these substances might lead later on, if you get like the habit of it or you become addicted to it, to cause what's called the dependence syndrome, which is actually a cluster of a behavioral and a cognitive and a physiological phenomena that develops from that. In brief, like it means like you would get like a strong desire to have the drug. You start to get more and more of it. You have like some physical symptoms when you stop it, and there is an increased tolerance to what you can take, and you give it a priority. We usually don't rush to diagnosing such problems easily. So as professionals, we usually follow a criteria to diagnose problems, and you might be well aware around that. We just don't find one symptom and that's it. So what's called an international classification diagnostic criteria, which is done by the World Health Organization and followed by that, is we have to find 3 or more of the following 6 criterias to be present, and these things should be sometime during the previous year of meeting a patient. So the first thing is to have a strong desire, or call as a craving for the substance, and a compulsion to take it, whatever the substance is. It could be like alcohol, it could be opiates. Opiates means like heroin, prescription tablets, sleeping pills, things like that. The other thing is you find there's a difficulty in controlling the substance and difficulty in stopping it, basically. And whenever you stop it, there's like some physiological withdrawal symptoms. You have physical symptoms, like, and for every substance, there is a different set of symptoms that would identify and would tell us, well, this person is probably dependent on that. The fourth thing is tolerance, which means that you start to develop an increased need for an increased amount or increased frequency of this drug. So let's say you start with one sleeping tablet, and this is not been prescribed to you. You just take it to rest your nerves or to calm yourself. But after like few weeks, you start to need 2 tablets just to have the same effect that you used to have. And then later on, you start to need 3 tablets and 4 tablets. And sometimes you might take it like several times a day. And that's what's called tolerance. And then there is a other criteria, which is progressive neglect of any other things that were interesting to you. So if you were studying properly, you don't study anymore. You're not interested in studies. If you're working properly, you're not working properly anymore. But interest in family relationships, social and occupational functions would be affected. And the last thing is you would be persisting in doing this habit, although there are harmful consequences happening. Let's say health problems, like for example with alcohol, like some liver problems. Even if you have other different physical health complications, you still go on with this. If you even have legal problems, you're still going with this. If you have financial problems like debts piling up on you, you're still doing this. Things like that. So from these 6 criterions, if you have 3 or more of that, then that's an alarming sign that there is an addiction or dependence on this symptom. So what causes all of this is what Dr. Waleed will start to talk about, like how the brain is affected and how this develops biologically. Go on, Dr. Hassan.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. So, assalamu alaikum, and thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be with this nice community, and I hope that it will be a fruitful meeting. So, I'm going to give like a brief highlights on the following, like an introduction to how our brain and how it works, the reward center, and the reward, the neurobiology of addiction, and finally, like the recovery. So, as you all know, our brain is have different loops, and this is like we have a frontal loop, parietal loop. It's like 4 loops: temporal and occipital loop, and we have an area in the brain responsible for the equilibrium, like the cerebellum, and we have the brainstem. This is like how our brain structure. And if we have a look on the different areas responsible for the functions, so we have an area for the movement, sensations, vision, coordination, the memory, which is very important, and we have a reward center, and we have an area responsible for the judgment and the decision making. So, generally speaking, regarding the evolutionary psychology or the evolutionary neurobiology, actually, we can divide our brain into 2 parts. One of them is like the old or the lower brain, and the other one is the higher brain. So the old lower brain is the one that we share with every creature on the land. So we share this structure with the animals and whatever it is, like horses, rats, whatever. And from this, you can expect what would be the function of this lower brain. So usually, if we share this in common with all the animals, so it must be responsible for very basic things like it regulates our respiration, our heart rate, our body temperature, our muscle movements. It mediates some emotions like the anger, fear, pleasure. And also it can imprint some survival memories like nauseous and pleasurable experiences. And for that, it may hold some of the addiction memories. And the other part of the brain, which is the newly evolved higher brain, the one that we can say like, this is the mind, like just like our meeting title today. This is the mind. This is the thing that helps us to process information and do some reasoning. This is what can control our drives and control our desires. So we have the integration between these 2 parts. One is the new or the higher brain, and the other one is the lower brain. Okay, and for healthy individuals, we can integrate, like they work together. They can integrate both functions together. So whenever like I have any drive, for example, I have seen a nice mobile, a drive or a desire comes to my mind to take it, but my higher brain is going to stop me, tell me, okay, if you take it, you'll have a consequence. The police might arrest you, and you will get yourself into trouble. So you will have to figure out a way, like you should work more, you get some money, then you put or you buy this. So are humans, and this is I think it has been a question for a long time, are we wired to be addicted? Let's see together. So if I told you that we have a reward center in our brain, what do you think would be the function of this? Why has God created us with a reward center in our brain? Is it just to feel happy, to make life less stressful? Is it to enjoy our lives? Is it to survive? And I would be happy if you can share some writing in the chat box. Like why which one do you think is it related to that? Is it just to make you happy and enjoying, or it's very critical for our survival?
So some people are saying survival over here. Yeah. All of them.
All of them.
Yeah.
Oh, we have Walid Hussein. I have been looking how I thought it's Walid Hassan. I have been thinking how I wrote it.
It's Wajid. It's Wajid Hussein.
Wajid. Okay, so I have to check my eyesight.
Yeah.
Okay, all of them. And would it help if I told you that the reward center is located in the lower brain? So we and the animals actually have a reward center. So simply we have a model of addiction, like we have an animal model of addiction in animals. So we can try the rats and or whatever to have this. So being in the lower brain, what do you think it will have? What would be the function? It's more toward the survival. Yes, it's all of them, but it's more toward the survival. Let's have a look on how the reward center. So it's this area in the brain, and actually, what happens that there is some natural rewards that simply when you do it, you will get this center activated, and when the center activated, it releases some a neurotransmitter called dopamine, and this dopamine would make you feel happy. So there is some very natural things like food or drinks or sex. So this is like the basic drive that keep us alive and keep the humanity. So when we do any of this, like you will feel some pleasure. Okay. So just imagine like if someone can have a food or drink because it's just very important for our survival. Like if it was controlled by our higher brain, it would be have just like how we put gas in the cars. It's like fuel. Like I ate 4 days ago and I need like 8,000 calories and 2,000 calories each day. So it would have been like that. Like I would eat once per week or once 8,000 calories one time, then I will fast for like we do with the cars. But actually, we do not do this as humans because this is the reward center. So we feel that we are pleased to eat and drink. The same for sex, which is the main aim for sex is to get new generations of humanity. And also the higher brain can send some things that to stimulate this brain center, which is like when we succeed, when we get a new job, new car, when our kids make some progress or whatever, when we earn money. So all this thing can stimulate the reward center. And when this center is stimulated, we would feel pleased, we would feel happy. Okay. So what do you think if we try to stimulate this just with an electrode, just with some electricity? Like we put an electrode, like at the picture at the right, we put an electrode, we put an electrical impulse that is able to stimulate this. Do you think we can generate happiness? And the answer is yes. Like, yeah, this would make the center stimulated and you start to feel happy. And this is the same what happened like in this with the rat when they have put this electrode, and the rat was able to get himself like please himself through pressing a lever. And actually what happens that the rat kept pressing the lever forever, even he stopped eating or drinking or doing anything until he died. So what is the importance of this information? And as I told you before, that the healthy human can function and integrate the drive between the lower and the higher brain. So what as Dr. Muhammad just mentioned this term, the psychoactive drugs. Simply, psychoactive drugs are all the drugs that are able to target or affect the brain in a way or another. And this is simply that they can stimulate or can affect the reward center. So simply let us imagine that someone has taken one of the drugs that can affect this reward center. So first thing, he would feel very happy. Okay, like can you imagine something like I used to give, like if the normal pleasure is something like you can take a sip of a drink, it's like a sip, it's a sip of dopamine. What happens if you just simply spill it over? This is what happened with the psychoactive drugs. So for some people, they would feel like a huge sense of pleasure, like they would be very pleased. Okay, so till now this is something very nice, and What's the problem with that? Like, if this is something is able to make us feel happy, what's the problem? The problem actually that's because this is something uh, that's pleasurable. So our memory, it will go straightly, like memory will volunteer and say, I'm gonna store this for you. I'm gonna store this with all the triggers, with all the things that happen together during this. So I'm gonna store, like, you have felt this pleasure while you were taking this with this person at that place, and we'll make like a list of things and store it for you. And this will be responsible for one of the symptoms that we have, which is craving. Like, you get this memory again and again and again. Okay, what else? The problem actually that it goes to the area responsible for the judgment, which is the front part of the brain, and actually it starts to weaken the connection between the higher and lower brain. So you start to lose control. So you have a desire or urge. If you remember, like, I want to take this mobile, but now my higher brain is not properly functioning. So I will start having these thoughts, like I cannot control myself, or simply I'm unable really to control myself. So I have a huge desire to get myself pleased, and I have no control over it. And on the molecular level, like, you can start getting tolerance, which by this means that you will have to increase the dose to keep the same effect. So it's like the receptors seem like losing its sensitivity. So you have to start by low amount, then you have to increase it frequently just to get the same effect. And lastly, when you stop, you start to get a severe withdrawal symptoms. It's symptoms that make you very, very annoyed. So by all this, can you imagine that your memory keeps saying to you that this is very, very pleasurable thing? Your higher brain has lost its function. And when you try to stop it, like, you get very painful withdrawal, whether it's psychological or physical. So how can this be do you think it will affect the person? And you can see this is some of the structural brain that change that happen. And the red means the red colors mean that you have enough dopamine receptors. And you can see on the control group, they all have this red colors, while on people who are taking some of the psychoactive drugs, they have lost this red coloration, which means that they are losing receptors. Okay, this is the same, like how actively the brain in the control group, people who are not taking any psychoactive drugs, while someone who are on cocaine. So how long it takes to happen? Like, simply, if I have taken drug once, twice, to this structural change to happen, how long it takes? Actually, we don't know. It varies from person to person and varies from a drug to drug. So for some drugs, like the cocaine or the morphine, they have a higher ability to get addicted in comparison to other drugs. Some people even may get addicted to very simple things, just like chocolate, sugar, caffeine. Like, it varies from a drug to drug and from a person to person. But the one thing we know is that the more you use, the more you get hooked to it. So simply, the frequent use is able to make this structural change happen so frequently and so very obviously. So if someone started to take a drug once, and for some people, like, they just experiment. So if you experimented once or twice, please try to stop as soon as possible, because the more you go on with this drug, the more you will get some structural change, which would make it very difficult for you later on. So, but just to give hope, this is the recovery. Like, if this is a healthy brain, and the middle one for someone who has been taking drug, okay, with only 1 month of abstinence, like he stopped for a month, you can see that he still did not get any red coloration in his brain. But with prolonged abstinence, like for a year, like the brain structure is gonna try to recover itself, and you are going to feel the same feelings you have before. Which by this I mean, like you can enjoy normal things because of, if you look at the middle, simply lacking this receptors means that you are not gonna respond to anything of the natural rewards. So simply when someone is addicted, they are unable to enjoy normal things that happens. They are unable to enjoy success, any earning money, any food or drinks. They just are like zombies and just seek the drugs. So just to finalize what I have said, so simply, I hope the structural change are very clear. When you use, your memory is gonna store it very well, store everything related to it. The brakes or your higher brain is gonna dysfunction, so you will be unable to, or the person is gonna be unable to control his drives. He would get severe withdrawal symptoms, so he'll be like hooked. So my first advice, because we don't know who would be hooked and who might not be, don't test to yourself, please. Don't try to jump from the 10th floor to see simply if your bone is gonna is hard enough. So please don't test yourself. And in case you have tested it, please take care. Try to move quickly. Try to stop it quickly. You would be lucky if you stop before the structural change happens, because if it happens, I think it's just like when we do an accident with a car. Even if we fixed it, you would have some effect for later on. So try to move quickly so you can minimize the damage. Thank you so much, and I'm very happy to receive any question if anyone have by the end of the presentations. Thank you. You can go on and now, Dr. Muhammad, continue your presentation.
Okay. I'll add my bit again. Yes. Okay. So just a couple of slides, and with the focus on our areas, the prevalence, or what we call as how big is the problem. So as you know, public health and NHS usually publishes like statistics around the impact of the problem. So the last published statistics were November 2019, so almost a year now, and it's around the impact of the problem. So it says that 2,917 deaths related to poisoning by drug misuse happened in the last year. There's actually a 17% increase compared to 2017 statistics, which is a big jump. Okay, but especially when you know that's 46% compared to last year, so that means there's a steep rise in the situation. And if you focus on an interesting statistic as well, which is the adults, it's a nine. It says that 9.4% of adults, which is between 16 and 59, had taken illicit drugs last year. But if you focus on the young adults that are 16 to 24, it's 1/5 of them who has taken the illicit drugs. So there's what they're noticing. There's a surge in the young adults trying illicit or street drugs. Even the hospital admissions are 18,053 hospital admissions because of poisoning from drug misuse. And that's a 6% increase from last year and 16% compared like 2012, 2013, like 5 years ago. So there's again a sharp rise in the hospital admissions. So it's not only deaths, it's also hospital admissions. And an interesting one, which says that admissions were around 5 times more likely in the most deprived areas. So if you look at the most deprived areas in the UK, in England, you'll find them having 5 times more likely to have admissions. And then when you look at the next one, which is admission rates for both the drugs and behavioral disorders, the Northeast was the highest in the admissions rate. So they usually comment on that per 100,000 patients. So they say like in the Northeast, there are like 24 out of 100,000 admissions related to behavioral disorder, which is the highest in the country. And when you look at the counties specifically in the Northeast, the highest was Sunderland, while the lowest was in Gateshead. Newcastle upon Tyne is 21, so it's in the middle. But overall, the Northeast is the highest. And this is another graph, another picture that shows the density of the magnitude of the problem. If you look at the Northeast, it's in dark blue. Dark blue means it's the highest admission rates per 100,000 population in England. And you can see that Northeast is the darkest. And if you look at this graph, there's a graph in which showing like you'll be probably familiar with these graphs because of the COVID situation that the presentation is present on the BBC. If you look at the years, 2013, 2014 till 2018, 2019, there's a rise in the number of admissions that are happening in the Northeast. So again, like we've summed up like the problem, how to diagnose it, and the impact of the problem. It seems that there's a sharp rise in the Northeast in relation to drugs and alcohols. What are the services present? I work in the mental health trust that it's myself and Imam Reza as well. We work in the mental health trust that's taking care of that. So in Newcastle, there are clinical and drug and alcohol services, and that's present everywhere in the nation. But basically, briefly to say what they do, these are specialist addiction services. They offer the support, medical and nursing support, including like medications to support, reduction. There are something called detoxification programs in which you stop totally. There's harm reduction programs in which you get like, and that's specifically for opiates or for heroin and prescription opioids. And they give you like replacement for that till you are having the decision to stop it. That's called harm reduction. There's some day services. There's some intensive support provided, individual key worker sessions. Sometimes specialist criminal justice services are helping because of the legal problems sometimes entangled with that. There's psychosocial support such as counseling alongside clinical intervention. And there is also like physical health screening because sometimes there are blood-borne viruses that take place. Okay, and then there is partnership when working with the recovery coordination services. What happens in these services is that when you first come into these services, you are offered usually a clinical assessment. They see whether you have a big problem, a problem that could be solved easily, or that there are lots of team members that need to be admitted. So it's an assessment of the needs actually, and then usually the services place the most appropriate part of service to address your needs. And this is always done in liaising with your own GP. Of course, confidentiality is maintained. And usually there's a recovery coordinator. What I'm doing here in this slide, that I'm putting all the contacts and all the emails for different drug and alcohol services that are present in Newcastle area, okay? And what we wanted to just shine a little bit of light on are two other disorders when we were meeting and we were planning for these sessions. There are other things that usually come in association with drug and alcohol. I know that I'm short of time right now. I have a couple of minutes, so I'll be finishing soon. So there's what's called the gambling disorder, and that's something else that's been noted to be prevalent. And this involves like repeated problematic gambling behavior. It's called gambling addiction or compulsive gambling as well. So you find that people are betting more than they can afford. They usually bet larger amounts than before. People are in the habit of trying to win back the money that they've lost, or what we call chasing losses. People starting to borrow money for that. People who are wondering, like, and having stresses and anxieties and health problems because of that. Some people, of course, put their households at financial problems because of gambling. This is called the gambling disorder. And of course, you are aware, and anyone who's in Newcastle or in the UK generally, you find like many betting shops around. And it seems to me that even they're surviving the COVID situation. I'm not sure how, but it's a habit that people could get, and that's something that might be associated with addictions. The management of course, as well, there is national gambling helpline for helping people who are suffering from this problem as well. And there is some evidence it could be successfully treated by psychotherapy. That's a form of talking therapy. Again, I'm listing like what's called GamCare and National Gambling Helpline. I'm listing it in the slides over here for people who might have an awareness of someone they know about this problem, and they can request the slides. The last thing that I'm going to talk about, which we highlighted as well, like porn addiction / sex addictions, that's something. So that's something that we've been seeing as well rising recently, and that's people who are very addicted to pornography, like explicit sexual materials, magazines, books, videos, consuming pornography. Again, what are the signs that you might notice? And that's by the way, is prevalent in young age. You might notice like increased isolation from family, friends, spouse, negative consequences in professional and family relationships, preoccupation with accessing or consuming porn. There are feelings of shame and guilt and self-disgust. Decreased desire for sexual activity, especially for like I'd see like married couples who come, and the problem with one of the partners like not interested in the other part. So feeling unable to control, and there is decreased intimacy. Lots of what have been mentioned we might see in people, and that's like porn addiction. Last bit is the porn addiction management. There is no research that is done and does not support any specific treatment for pornography addiction so far. But like and of course, to explain this, I'm sorry, it's so far it's not listed as a medical condition, but it's something that's prevalent that we can see. But some people who come to us and they seek treatment of pornography addiction in our clinics, we sometimes dig in other issues that we will find, like relationship problems, sexual problems. Sometimes it's depression. Sometimes people do this habit in times of stress. So usually treatment strategies would be around, again, talking therapy, and to understand people's frustration. Is there any unmet sexual needs, and develop strategies with dealing with psychological stress. Sometimes relationship counseling for couples is very helpful in eliminating that, and in my opinion, that's one of the most successful things that have been done for people who have been pornography problems in a relationship. And medications, sometimes there is an underlying problem that needs medication to help. It's not the pornography itself that's treated by medication, and some lifestyle changes, of course, might help. And that's to conclude like our part in the presentation, the addictions, the dependence, and how to manage and get support for that. Thank you.
Thank you so very much to you both, Dr. Al-Hamshari and
Hope we're in time.
Thank you. I want to say thank you to you both, Dr. Al-Hamshari and Dr. Hassan, for sharing your expert knowledge with us. Brothers and sisters, if you have any questions that are quite personal and you don't want to share with them, you can direct those questions directly to those two doctors in the chat box, and they will do their best to answer your questions, inshallah. The next speaker we have is Brother Aaron. Brother Aaron will be sharing his personal journey, the most harrowing, brave story of his battle and struggle with addiction. And Aaron has very kindly offered to share his personal lived experience of his journey of addiction and how he successfully overcame it. So, Brother Aaron, if you could unmute yourself and join us on this platform. Thank you.
Yeah, hello. Assalamu alaikum all. Good afternoon. Firstly, I would like to thank Newcastle Central Mosque and the doctors present today, just for sort of putting this session on. I feel like it's a very important thing to be looking at, and I am grateful for having this opportunity to share. So firstly, I'll give you a bit of background on myself. I'm quite a sort of intelligent young man, confident, outspoken. I did study psychology, law, and English language at A-level. I come from a drug-free background, strict but fair parents. So sort of the reason I'm sharing that is to show that addiction can truly happen to anyone, regardless of their circumstance or situation. Anyone can fall victim to it. In my personal experience, I fell victim to cocaine and gambling. The pair did go hand in hand, with cocaine being sort of the primary issue of the sort of drugs I was taking. So my experience with addiction, although it was short-lived, it was very severe. So basically, obviously, some people do get addicted to different things, but mine was mainly cocaine. Cocaine is something that is very accessible and generalized, especially in the northeast and sort of the nightclubs within young people. It's frequently seen glorified on movies, and for me, I feel like this might have sort of subconsciously had an influence on the sort of movie star lifestyle. So the first time I tried cocaine, it gave us like euphoric feeling, a feeling I'd never experienced before, and I feel as though this experience set the standard in my head for how I sort of wanted to feel when I took that drug. However, I feel the addiction did not start there. A couple of months went on. Obviously, it became sort of a once in a now and again thing. Joining the crowd and just wanting that feeling, I would do one every now and again. But that's when I noticed the habit begin to start. So it was happening once in a while, then it turned in every weekend, and then every weekend led to 4 days a week, until I was going maybe 5-6 days a week, for about a month, 2 months, with fully cocaine, all day, all night, using paracetamols to sort of keep myself looking sober while I was walking around, and obviously gambling on the night time as well. It's like I said, so sort of while at the peak of this sort of 5-6 days a week while doing these drugs, the euphoric feeling that I originally got when I first had cocaine was no longer there, and that's how I feel gambling sort of played a part, was because those was sort of balancing out with the euphoric feeling that I was trying to chase. So basically, those months went by like a blur. The only way I can truly explain that is it was as if something else had sort of taken over my body. Even now, when I sort of think back to that time, it was as if my body was an autopilot. It's very vague, sort of remembering how I felt when I was doing it or why I was even doing it. But like I said, so within about a month or so, I did feel as though I had a problem, and I did reach out to someone who I thought may have understood, may have helped, someone I felt comfortable with. However, it was brushed aside at that time, which obviously made me feel like it was less of a problem than I had been. Obviously, this was a cry for help, and I feel like this is sort of the first kind of point I want to make, is that if you do feel like, because I remember I started off Googling sort of cocaine addiction, looking at the signs. I wanted to speak to somebody, and I think if you are Googling or you are feeling like you've got a problem, then you probably do. And it's best to act on it straight away, like the doctor said in the first thing. So don't test yourself. Straight away, you want to be sort of picking up on that. So like I said, as I carried on, the amount of cocaine and money spent on gambling was increasing, and it was only sort of going up and up. My tolerance to sort of getting excitement, to getting those dopamines that the doctors mentioned was getting higher to sort of reach that same hit that I wanted. And then it was just one day, I woke up. Obviously, I was getting about 1-2 days of sleep at this time, and it was I just woke up and the realization hit of what I had actually done over the past sort of 2-3 months. I was no longer around my family. I was mainly getting hotels on a night time to sit and do drugs and gamble on my own. I was tied up with lies that had sort of spiraled out of control just to keep this addiction feeding. It was quite a low point for me. I was in sort of debt with a drug dealer, £1,000, and I knew I had just reached the limit that I sort of didn't see any way of coming back from. It was just that was the end of that chapter. I sort of did not know how to bounce back from it. I really didn't know how to tell anyone. I felt so ashamed, full of guilt, especially sort of the people closest to me, my parents. I see myself as quite a good role models, and obviously I knew I'd let people down. So what I did is I texted a place called Talk to Frank, and the sort of letters, one of the places mentioned in the first slides, and they let me call them. I spoke about sort of my mood while I was in this hotel room at the time. I was still under the influence. I was sort of crying on the phone. It was basically just me pouring my heart out to somebody, as I wasn't yet ready to tell my family. So she advised me on the phone of the treatments that are nearby. Then she also advised me talking to maybe family members. So I agreed to attend a session with one of the ladies. But at this point, my mind was already made up. I knew that this path, this route I was going down was not for me at all. Obviously, I knew straight away that was sort of an error. Like I said, the drug taking once I woke up that moment, it was as if I could not have any more drugs in my system. That was it. I was just completely disgusted, left feeling ashamed. So basically, when I went to see her, she advised, after she sort of asked about my dosage and my usage, she advised that I actually continue how I am. However, I slowly decrease my intake until the cravings go away. So she advised sort of creating a new association, such as whenever I feel the urge to take drugs or gamble, maybe to have a glass of milk. And basically, I did take her advice on board. I went to see her a couple more times after that. And it took me about a month or 2 months. I did continue gambling now and again, but the cocaine mainly was completely out of the system. And the gambling was just giving me that sort of fix that I needed. And at the time, I saw it as a way to remake the money that I had wasted on this sort of powder. And that was around December last year. So I'm coming up to sort of a year completely drug free, which obviously I feel great about. Obviously, some people would have benefited from a different way, but for myself, I think just being cold turkey was the route for me. So as I said, even though my addiction was short-lived, it was very severe. But I do feel that the drive that I had was stronger than the addiction itself. So by the time the addiction had finished, I had an opportunity to open up with my family, mainly my mum and my dad, basically because the sort of damage it had caused to people around me, to sort of my normal life as I knew it had been damaged so much. So I sort of had to speak to them as I was at a mental low point. And despite them being very strict, both parents very strict, they keep us on a straight line. I sort of cried, and they did offer the support, and they made me see the positive side about how I was able to overcome something like that despite the sort of situation I was in. And I realised that you've got to be a strong person to overcome these sort of things. And to have an addiction and overcome it is something only few people can experience. So yeah. So basically, just to round off my story, obviously, like I said, just reiterate that addiction can happen to anyone, despite background or anything like that. It's like a virus. It really is. It can be life-threatening at times. And for myself, I don't believe it always comes with signs. Obviously, there is signs there, but for me, I was just tied up in these lies. I was keeping myself to myself. And that, like I said, I was neglecting myself away from my family, away from my friends. So if you do feel like someone around you maybe is addicted to something, do look at their behaviour. Try and see if they are lying or they're making up sort of, or they're moving shifty when you're speaking about a certain area. Because I know myself, whenever the topic was brought up, I would feel the palpitations because I would know that I was doing wrong. Because yeah, like I said, I never thought I would be able to overcome those things, yet be able to talk for them now. This is the sort of first time I'm really getting it off my chest and having a time to reflect on myself as well. It was something I was very, very ashamed of, and I really held a lot of guilt in my heart for a while before I could understood that I now have to take pride in it because I've had the willpower, I've had the drive, and I found the problem and I fixed it. And addiction is like another mistake. Some people make small ones, some people make bigger ones. For myself and a lot of people, it was quite a big one. And I think the key to addiction is catching it as early as possible. Whether it's been 2 years, 20 years, or 2 days, take steps to stop it immediately. This sort of one more day mentality could be the difference between life and death or freedom and captivity. I sort of thought of this analogy when I was writing this as well, is that for me, it felt like being in prison. I was trapped in my own head, being ordered around by this substance that I could not overpower. I could not be free. I was sort of strapped down with this sort of urge that was present in all things. So basically, how I started to sustain from those. To begin with, I isolated myself from the whole shebang. So I stayed away from places that I knew would be present, such as nightclubs and parties. Friendships I had around me started to deteriorate due to this, as I no longer shared this common habit, which was very hard at the beginning. I started to feel lonely, but I had a strong support system in my family there. And this continued for a while. I sort of kept myself neglected for a while away from these areas. However, now I have been around it where it has been present. However, I've been able to say no, and I've been able to know that it's bad for me, and I would honestly never ever touch it again. So the main things to take away from this is tell somebody if you do feel the need, if you do feel that you've got a problem, speak to someone. a rule I live by at the moment is if you can't tell your mum about it, it's probably not good for you. So if you sort of live by that and make sure that whatever it is, if you can speak to your mum, if you can't speak to your mum about it, it's not good. So it should be stopped. And addiction can happen, like I said, to anyone. And anything that makes you feel good while doing it, but makes you feel bad after, again, is probably not good for you. Those sort of things that give you a quick instant hit, but then afterwards you're having hangovers or you're feeling depressed or whatever it is, it's not good. So yeah, just to round it off, I just feel the longer that you stay addicted, the longer that you stay with these habits, the harder it's going to be to break. But just remember, an addiction is never unbreakable, despite how long it might go on for. That there's always that time to act now. So yeah, thank you for allowing me to share that.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you so very much for that, Brother Aaron, for sharing your story with us, with the Mind program. Your journey to overcome your addiction is inspirational, and it will give hope to so many suffering from addiction. So thank you very much for that. Which leads us to our next and our fourth speaker, which is Imam Muhammad Raza Rahman. He is a Muslim scholar from Newcastle upon Tyne. He's been nationally awarded for his role in interfaith and community engagement. He currently works as a mental health chaplain for the National Health Service and is a regularly community advisor to local and national organizations. He is trained in Islamic theology and memorization of the Quran and has achieved a MA in Muslim chaplaincy. He specializes in spiritual, person-centered therapy besides other forms of recovery processes. Please help me to welcome Imam Raza on the virtual stage to share his expertise with us. Welcome, Imam Raza.
Thank you very much for having me. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'd like to first and foremost thank Newcastle Central Mosque for having me on today's session with you all. I just want to echo what Taj has said, and I'm sure everyone would want to say the same thing to Aaron, for the fact that your story was very powerful and insightful in relation to the journey of someone who's obviously faced a process of addiction and how you've recovered. So thank you very much for sharing your story. It was really, really moving. Now, moving on from, just bear with me for one moment. I think it's that one. That's the one, right. So moving on from the medical, we're now moving to the spiritual in relation to addiction, how to relieve ourselves of addiction and how to help others in relation to addiction. Now, I'm going to be focusing on the role of spirituality in managing addiction within Islam. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to really sort of focus on local community matters, real matters. I will also be highlighting the essence of spirituality in terms of how can we as individuals move out from addiction using Islamic psychology and other psychological methods as well. And also I'll be sort of looking at, or I'll be actually asking questions to everyone in relation to what processes or structures do you think there ought to be in our communities to help people with addictions and many other forms of issues as well. Okay. Now, first and foremost, I want to ask you all the question, which I'm obviously going to answer. What is Islamic spirituality? The idea of spirituality is really a means of motivating yourself towards a positive outcome using methods and treatments and processes which enables you to feel good within yourself, within your behaviors, within your thoughts, and within your actions. So in terms of the end result of it all, you feel satisfied with achieving something within yourself in order to help yourself and obviously, hopefully, to help others as well within that process. Now, I'm going to focus on the concept of the nafs, otherwise known as the self, and the importance of its management. And the reason why I'm saying, why I'm going to highlight this is because we all face addictions in some way or the other. Not necessarily just gambling or you know, drinking or even drugs, even social media, even the addiction of being blameworthy, or the addiction of not being helpful towards other people or even towards ourselves. There are various types of addictions, and obviously we are focusing on drugs, gambling, pornography, etc. But I want to focus here on how do we manage ourselves in relation to our behaviors, our thoughts, and our actions in relation to relieving ourselves from addiction. So this part here on the presentation, it states that there are 3 stages of the self. Now, the self here that I'm referring to from a Muslim point of view is this inner voice that you have within yourself, which either calls you to do something positive or something negative. So we have different stages of that inner voice, which is otherwise known as the nafs. And these are the 3 stages. So we are all born with a particular sort of natural disposition in which the inner self or the inner voice has a command over us. It's overpowering, which in Arabic is known as amara. In other words, we are all born with an inner voice which allows us to have boundless experiences of joy and mischievousness, etc., without knowing the difference between what is right or what is wrong. This part, meaning this initial development in terms of our self or our inner self, either grows through time or stays throughout life, dependent on the type of experiences we have, the environments we are in, and also the self-regulatory processes and self-discipline we have within life. So that is the first stage in terms of the inner voice or the nafs or the self. Now, as we grow older, as we start to realize what is wrong and what is right, we start to blame ourselves, or we start to blame others for our mistakes, or we start to think, why am I doing this for? Our inner voice says to us, we're not good enough, or maybe nobody wants you, maybe nobody wants to help you. That is the next stage of the development of the nafs, or of the inner voice, which is called in Arabic lawama, the blameworthy self. That you feel like, you know what, right, I know what is right or wrong, but I feel like I'm always being depressed. I'm always falling into the trap of addiction. I'm always trapped here. I don't know how to get out. I don't know who's going to help me. I'm not quite sure where to go. Okay, so you have that as the next stage of the inner self. And last but not least, you have something called mutma'inna, which is the type of inner voice or the type of inner self which enables you to feel content and happy and complacent within every part of life. Okay, that from a Muslim perspective is the highest and the greatest form of development of the inner voice or the inner self. And that happens after regulating your behavior, after regulating your environment, after regulating your company in terms towards positivity. That is when you achieve the content self, or the self which is happy, which is complacent in a good way, by the way, and which is positive. Okay, so now in the end, as you can see on the screen, it says the goal is to be content with oneself through the remembrance of Allah. In other words, in Islam, the idea of the content inner self is to achieve a balance in which one is able to be to please Allah through their own happiness of what life has brought for them because of the regulation of their behaviors and of themselves, but at the same time, within their engagements around society and within their own household and within people, they're able to be content and happy as well. So in other words, being content within your home, within your life, and also content within the decree of God ultimately in the end. Now, what I would say is this: there are many people I have faced in my line of work who may be 40, maybe 50. I'm just giving an example. Their stage in terms of their inner self or the inner voice is at the first point, overpowering, or the inner self, which is amara. They haven't moved to blameworthy, or they haven't moved to content, or the idea of contentment within inner self. And everyone, I'm sure we can ask ourselves, where do we fall into these categories? Are we all of them? Are we only one category? And I think it's fair to say, personally, and I'm sure we all can say, our nafs or our inner self falls in each of these categories dependent on the circumstances within our life. So the question then is that how do we maintain a balance of thoughts and behaviors throughout the realm of life in relation to our engagements and actions? And this relates to addiction as well. In other words, how can you regulate our addictions and move away from that by achieving a sense of inner self which is full of contentment? Now, I want to move on to the next part in relation to causes of addiction in the home and community. By the way, I must say as well, these are all based on my experiences of working within the Newcastle Northeast community for 15 years, within both hospitals and in communities. So this is really based on my experience. So what are the causes of addiction in the home and community that I have found? Well, number one, lack of parental love. Number two, lack of hope. Number three, lack of spiritual guidance. Number four, lack of home security. Number five, lack of self-control. Addiction is the result of sustained lack of nurturing mechanisms for the spiritual self-growth. This is what I've come to know of in terms of my community experience in helping people within the community move away from addiction, whether that be gambling, whether that be drugs, pornography, social media, you name it. A lot of these symptoms that I've just mentioned have caused people to feel addicted towards these things. Let me give you one example. One particular individual, this is going back a couple of years, they went to a particular imam for guidance on how to stop himself from watching pornography. And he was married as well, by the way. The imam didn't necessarily give him much guidance other than the fact that he should try and stay home as much as possible and be as intimate as possible with his spouse. This obviously caused a lot of issues for the individual because they didn't know how to, or he wasn't quite sure how to, because there were other issues within the home which were causing, of course, a lot of issues to happen between himself and the spouse, and hence, due to lack of sexual engagement, his sexual engagement was obviously through watching pornography. Now, I'm not blaming the imam for this, but what I'm saying is lack of awareness or education in our communities in how to deal with issues such as pornography and lack of collaborative mechanisms with healthcare providers can obviously leave a large amounts of cases within our communities unattended to, and they can manifest into various other things as well. Another simple case, someone was taking drugs. Someone said to me, the reason why I take drugs because I want to feel a high. The reason why I want to feel a high is because my parents don't necessarily engage with me at home. My father stays out all day. My mother's always in the kitchen. I want to talk to my mum. I don't find any engagement with my mum. Hence, I went out, met with some friends, and I feel really good in having drugs. These are just some of the, obviously, causes that I found within our communities, very similar to the previous speakers as well. Now, real cases of addiction in the Muslim community and response. Again, I'm just moving on from the previous slide. I'm just expanding on that. Drugs, alcohol, sex, self-pleasure, and sexual grooming. So you have these issues. Why and what are the causes of these issues that I have found? Lack of parental family acknowledgement of a particular issue. Refusal to admit to causes of addiction by parents or family or other people as well. And rejection to take ownership of issues at home. You may have noticed a common theme that's coming through these slides: home, environment, love, parental guidance, spiritual guidance, communal guidance. And I'm not ashamed to say, and I'll be very frank, there's a lack of that in our communities. And there's a lot of youngsters and a lot of other people who fall into these categories of drugs, alcohol, sex, self-pleasure, and even sexual grooming as a result of these things that I've just mentioned on the bottom. In fact, I'm going to go back 4.5 years ago, to be precise. I was counseling a group of 5 girls who were from a particular sort of community, ethnicity, if you want to call it. They were being groomed by up to 11 guys. And I remember counseling them, and I remember seeing who these groomers were. I approached the groomers' families, who basically shut the door in my face. And when I provided the evidence and I said, look, we really need to tackle this. There's an addiction of them having many types of people around their homes and with drugs and alcohol. They absolutely refused to admit that there was an issue. And hence, as a result of that, these individuals continued to do what they were doing, and they eventually became embroiled in a lot of other activities as well. So what I'm trying to get at is addiction. Yes, we all have to help ourselves when it comes to addiction, but there's also a societal responsibility as well in relation to helping those with addictions as well. So we're all in it together in terms of helping people towards the road to recovery. And quickly, I just want to mention this. So here's the cycle that I use normally when I'm counseling patients, both Muslims and non-Muslims, both within the hospitals and within the community. But I just want to just highlight this. This is normally used when I'm counseling individuals around behavioral therapy, or you could call it CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, or the other types of therapy. It starts with the thoughts. And that thought then develops into a feeling, an emotional feeling, or a psychological feeling. And then it goes to a judgment of thought. So you're continuously thinking, and you think, yes, that is what it is. It must be the answer, or this is what I need. And that judgment of thought then expands towards having more feelings, emotional and psychological feelings. And from that 4th point onwards, that is when a person starts to act upon the development of the thoughts and the feelings. Our sort of responsibility as counselors, as chaplains, etc., is how do we enable someone to regulate all 4 points of this cycle of thought? And that's what we're trying to do in relation to our therapy. And I think when it comes to addiction, this is exactly the pattern that we use to say, how do we process and regulate each of these 4 points to ensure that someone can move away from addiction? Islamic psychology uses the same format as well. And last but not least, in relation to the slide, if anyone has read the hadith or Islamic scripture, you'll see that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said that if you have a thought and it's negative, but you don't carry out the action, you are rewarded for that. Okay? So the idea of regulating your behavior here is to ensure that you remain positive and immune from any negativity moving ahead. So ways of tackling addiction. For the one who is suffering, speak up. Don't be ashamed of expressing your feelings. It is okay to feel vulnerable when seeking help. You are not alone. And I stress and echo everyone who's come before me today. There is help available. Don't feel ashamed that in seeking help, because by seeking help, you are indeed strong and showing your strength. For the parents and the families and the community, do not judge or prejudge. Love and care is essential. Reflect on your relationship with your loved one. Do not disown them in any way. And for the community and the imams and providers, collaborate with mental health teams. Become a guide for the individual. Support families and provide spiritual love. You know what spiritual love is? Spiritual love isn't you're going to go to hell or God's displeased with you. That's not spiritual love. Spiritual love is actually enabling within yourself to replicate your behavior and your actions and your speech in accordance with the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, because he in himself was a beacon of love and light for the whole humanity. So modeling your guidance alongside the Prophet ﷺ's tradition in providing spiritual love. In conclusion, is addiction a disease? Well, there is definitely a dis-ease to addiction, but it looks apparent that addiction is the symptom of a misunderstanding of how our reality is created. Regardless of the opinion of organizations, array of treatments, concepts, and ideas about how to treat people, the most important thing is the grounding of the helper and love and compassion and understanding for the person suffering. There's got to be a balance, a relationship, an engagement of no prejudgment and not being judgmental, and ensuring that there is a healthy form of engagement in helping the one who is helping one moving away from addiction. Last but not least, we are all in this journey to recovery together. If someone in our community, if someone is facing addiction, if someone is addicted to something, it is not solely the responsibility of mental health teams to help them. It's the responsibility and the role of society to help that individual. And hence why I feel that we all bear a responsibility in helping each other. And with that said, I think, yes, I'm done. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. I have known Imam Raza for many years, and he has helped and supported hundreds of people. As you have heard him, he specializes in person-centered therapy and patient-led other forms of therapy. So thank you very much for your selfless commitment to the community, Imam Raza. The next, we have just over 15 minutes for any questions and answers. So if you have any questions, please raise your virtual hand and I will unmute you for you to ask your question. And you can direct your question to any of our 4 speakers. So please do so. Please welcome to the open questions and answers part of this program. So if you've got any questions, please unmute yourself or raise your virtual hand, and I will definitely unmute you if you're unable to mute yourself.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam, Wajid Hussain. What's your question and who is it for?
It's actually just more of a comment. I think we do have these problems in our society, in our community, and really want to thank the panel, Jazakallah khair, for everything you've done now. I think sometimes what happens is, I think Imam Raza touched on it, is within the community, we kind of ignore it, or we don't see it for what it is. And if there's anyone who thinks that it's easy, it's very simple. For example, like imagine somebody said to you, you can't use your mobile phone anymore, or you can't watch TV anymore, or you can't use your car. You know, you think it's easy for people to give up an addiction. It's a lot harder than that. And that support around them is really, really important. And that whole idea of not being judgmental. And I found all of it really, really inspiring. Jazakallah khair for everyone, and for the story from Brother Aaron there as well. And it's really useful in understanding that, you know, addiction isn't something that happens to others. It's within our community. It can be around us. And, you know, even things like social media, like, you know, even the Brother Reza was talking about, you know, pornography, it's so accessible that, you know, you don't know what somebody's doing on their phone. But it's not something that we should overlook. And it's something we need to, as a collective, be more supportive of in assisting sisters and brothers. Just because it doesn't affect us doesn't necessarily mean we're above and beyond it. It means that we have to be, as has been highlighted here, with humility and with compassion approach this situation, inshallah.
That's great. Thank you very much, Wajid Hussain, for sharing that. That's really gives a lot of people hope and inspiration to open up about these topics. Do any of the speakers want to elaborate on that?
Can I?
Sorry, Imam.
Yes, go on, Brother Reza. Imam Reza, go on.
Yes, sorry. All I would say, Brother Wajid, I absolutely agree with everything that you've said. I'd like everyone on this sort of webinar to think about what structures and what processes do you think ought to be developed within our communities to help those with addictions. And I think through that, we're able to work together in providing the best possible support for our communities and ourselves as well.
Right, next we have Alia. Alia, if you could unmute yourself to ask your question or feedback.
Hi, Assalamu alaikum. First of all, again, I would like to just second what Brother Wajid said. I think this has been a superb webinar. I found it very informative. I mean, my background is that I am a doctor, but I haven't worked for many years. and inshallah I plan to go back. So I found it very useful. One pertinent question I wanted to put forward was, when the family is part of the problem, in the support, I mean, in a sense, if they may have driven the person to addiction, that the person has sought solace in addiction, how can they then be part of the solution? And obviously, if they are taken out of the equation, who would come into that sort of hiatus? Thank you, Jazakallah.
That's a great question. Thank you very much, Alia. Who would like to respond to that? It's open to all our speakers.
I'm sorry, there was a problem. I didn't hear the question. Can you tell me the question, Sister Taj?
2 seconds. 2 seconds. I'll get Sister Alia. Sister Alia, could you repeat the question again?
I'm sorry, there was a problem with the connection.
Yeah, I can. Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, my main point was, I was just saying that when you've got somebody who's got an addiction, if it's the family sort of situation that has put them in that, you know, led them to seeking solace in addiction, how can they then be part of the solution of the problem? And obviously, as they won't be the solution of the problem, you know, who can fulfill that sort of hiatus?
Okay, I get your question. So basically your question is around whether if a family had a role, or there was like a problem in the family that has led for someone to have a problem with addictions, how can the family be a solution again? Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So what addictions is a multifactorial mental health problem. So it's usually not only one factor that would lead to developing addictions problem, and most of the time it's not always. You might find like family problems that could be one of the causal factors to having such a problem. And the problem with that is it affects, as you've mentioned, affects like the family dynamics later on. It affects, and because the family is very important for the recovery and for the help, especially in Eastern cultures like us. So this is a very important issue to be addressed usually when you're managing addictions, because first thing, you have to psychoeducate and inform the family of the nature of the problem, and that the problem is out of control of the patient right now, or who's suffering right now. And we, as Imam Reza has mentioned and as Aaron has mentioned, we need to support, and we need to stand by and change our beliefs and change the way that we're dealing with the problems that are coming out of the addictions issues and all that stuff. So you need to change the mindset, you need to change the understanding, you need to change the perception of the issue, and then you need some energy from them to help and support, because basically you are rebuilding the relationship between the family and whoever is taking the drugs. And by family, I don't mean like parents, I don't mean the father and the mother. Sometimes it's the wife. You know, sometimes it's a grown-up adult who the family depends on. It's not by nature only a young adult, you know. So that's part of why a therapy needs to be tailored. And to be honest, one of the most challenging things is usually with the parents or even with the other members of the family, there is a guilt feeling. You are always faced with parents who come and tell us, is it our mistake? Is it our fault? Did you have any problem in bringing the patient up? Are we to blame? And that's one of the important things that we focus on therapy, is that there might have been some mistakes, okay, but you don't need to blame yourself, because you are not the one who offered him his first alcoholic drink, or you're not the one who bought him cannabis, not the one who brought him heroin, you know. So unless you're that, then you're to be blamed. You might have done some mistakes, and it happens in many families that there are some mistakes in bringing up, but it doesn't necessarily lead to addictions problem. And from here we start to you know, put the family on our side, put the family and the patient on our side. Well, let's look how to manage things, rather than finding who's to blame and allowing the patient even to blame his parents sometimes, or her parents sometimes. So then we move on by changing the concepts and changing the perceptions and changing the wrong information that they might have, to building up a new information, not only with the patient and the family. And we use all that to go on forward with a plan of therapy. And of course, it needs a lot of patience, a lot of sabr, you know. I hope I'm answering your question this way.
Does any other speakers want to expand on that or make a contribution?
I'll mention one thing quickly. I think, Sister Alia, I think the question that you've sort of raised is an absolute important question in relation to our communities and the issues that we have on a collective basis. I think within part of our communities, we have cultural power structures which disable recovery for those who are suffering from addiction. And hence, as a result of that, sometimes as a chaplain and as a counsellor myself, I'm not only speaking to the individual affected, I'm speaking to the family as well. And sometimes it's not just speaking to the family, it's speaking to those cultural, authoritarian or structures in the society or in the community who have a slight dominance on the way and the psyche of the family structure itself. So it's about working on different levels to help the actual individual who's suffering from addiction. So for me, I take a collective and a universal approach than just quite simply looking at the individual. And hence, unfortunately, if you don't find in placement of the family, who obviously are the cause of the individuals suffering from addiction, if you don't find anything else within the community, then instead of sitting back and doing nothing, I'd rather create something in place of that to ensure that there is something there in that place. And that's why there are other organizations created around this type of theme that I've just mentioned in Birmingham, in London. We don't have something specific like this in the Northeast, but it's something that I'm hopeful that we can develop as time passes.
Jazakallah khair for such comprehensive answers. I really appreciate it. Jazakallah.
Thank you for asking that question, Sister Alia. Anyone else got any questions before we conclude? Please unmute yourself and ask the question. That's great. We must have been very thorough with what we've done today. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the speakers. Dr. Hassan, thank you very much. Dr. Al-Hamshari, thank you very much. A special thank you to Brother Aaron and Imam Raza for taking part in this program and sharing their expertise with us. And I also like to say thank you to the listeners for joining us today, and I hope we were able to answer all your questions, and we will share this recording of this program on the Masjid website, which will also have a link to YouTube, inshallah. The next upcoming third part of
Can I add something before you say the next session? So if anyone needs any links or anything, or any requested data for the links to the services available in Newcastle, just feel free to ask us for that, and we'll send it to you. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Dr. Al-Hamshari, for that. The next upcoming third part of Mind the Mind program is on emotional intelligence and relationships, which is going to be on the 5th of December, same time at 2 p.m. The process will be the same near the time. Please register on the Masjid website for the links. If you need any information, just send an email to Newcastle Central Mosque, which is contact@newcastlecentralmosque.com. Register for the next date. Like I said, the next program will be on the 5th of December at 2 p.m. Put that date in your calendar, and I wish you all the best for today and for future, and inshallah see you all in December. Thank you for your kind cooperation, and have a great day, and thank you to all the speakers as well.